Hello and welcome to Talking Business with me, Ben Thompson. So let's have a look at what's on the show. It is a crisis forcing governments to invest billions to avert a catastrophe. It's not the banking crisis though, it's the climate crisis. As Europe goes head to head with the United States on subsidies for green investment, we'll ask what it means for business, international trade and the future of the planet. I'll discuss that with these two. There they are, Gareth Radmond-King from the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit and international trade expert Kamala Dower from the University of Sussex. And we'll assess the impact on business with Wayne Griffiths, the big boss of the carmaker SEAT. It's just announced a massive electric car battery plant in Spain. He'll join me for an exclusive interview. And later in the programme, the man behind the cinema magic. I'll speak to the boss of visual effects giant Framestore, that's Sir William Sargent. I'll ask him about working on the world's biggest movies and what the future holds for film, TV and gaming. Wherever you're joining me from around the world, once again, a big hello and a warm welcome to the show. Now, just days before the UN issued its latest wake-up call to the world about global warming, the European Union laid out its ambitions to boost the green economy. It's announced plans for massive subsidies for green tech to match the near $400 billion already committed by US President Joe Biden in his signature Inflation Reduction Act. In Washington, D.C., the issue topped the agenda at the meeting between EU President Ursula von der Leyen and President Biden, taking precedence even over the war in Ukraine.
The first topic we discussed is the Inflation Reduction Act. And indeed, we welcome the Inflation Reduction Act because it is a massive investment in the green transition, moving towards a net zero economy. It is mirrored by the Green Deal industrial plan in the European Union.
The amounts of money we're talking about for these subsidies is huge. The American Inflation Reduction Act puts aside $369 billion in subsidies and tax credits for clean energy and technology. The aim is to drive up demand for American-made products. So if you want a subsidy for an electric car, the battery for it must be made in the USA. It's claimed green industries in America added 100,000 jobs in the first 5 months after the act was signed into law. But the EU is fighting back. In February, the Commission announced its own Green Industrial Deal, pledging more than $250 billion for the green transition. And then, earlier this month, 2 more big announcements for big subsidies. They are not yet law. They need to be approved by governments and the EU Parliament. But one of the main goals is to subsidise clean technology, where at least 40% of the product is made in the EU. But despite the big numbers, both the EU and US lag behind China. In 2022 alone, more than $500 billion was invested in the sector in China. Compare that to the $141 billion in the US. It is also way ahead of Germany, France and the UK. So, can these subsidies really make a difference to climate change? And what impact do massive subsidies in one part of the world have elsewhere? Let's talk to Gareth Radmond-King from the London-based Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. Gareth, it's good to have you on the show this week, and we're talking about some big numbers. But the question is, are they big enough numbers to tackle the climate crisis?
They are definitely big enough to make a difference. They may not be quite enough quite yet. The IPCC report that has just been published on the state of climate change globally suggests we need something like 3 to 6 times the level of investment that we currently have to get on track for net zero. But if you take the US, for example, $369 billion committed under the Inflation Reduction Act, alongside a couple of other pieces of legislation with money attached, maybe as much as $500 billion. That is an absolute step change in investment. It will help put the US a lot closer to getting on track for its current emissions targets. And also it will leverage considerably more investment. Some analysis reckons that 500 billion could leverage something like $1.2 trillion in private investment on top of that.
What we're seeing are these big blocks coming together, aren't we? Clearly the US, the EU, China's doing its own thing and it's way out front. I wonder where it leaves other smaller players, and I'm including in that the UK. Now it's left the European Union. Where does it leave anyone who doesn't have maybe as deep pockets?
I think overall, I think it puts us globally in a very good situation. We've got some of the biggest economies on the planet competing to fund the clean transition that the science is very clear we need if we want to get on track for 1.5 degrees. The UK has led the way before on investment in climate change. It has moved markets. It has brought, grown industries and brought supply chains to the UK to help that transition. I think there is a risk in the short term if the UK is not able to clarify the policy situation, to improve the regulatory situation in the UK, and yes, to keep providing public investment that clearly encourages and leverages that private investment, that it will get left behind, squeezed in between the EU and the US. But it is clearly a very valuable industry. Net zero is very valuable to the UK economy. Recent calculations showed it's worth around 70 billion a year. It employs about 840,000 people. That's something like 5 times what the oil and gas industry employs in the UK. So it's worth fighting for. It's worth investing in, and it is cheaper to invest in it than to bear the costs of not making that transition fast enough.
How long do these subsidies have to last, though? Because they are expensive. And I wonder, is this about changing behaviour in the short term or making a marked shift in the longer term? Because countries can't afford to keep paying this money.
No, and they don't need to. And we've got a very clear example here in the UK where if you look at offshore wind a decade, maybe 15 years ago, all the talk of offshore wind was to dismiss it, say it's way too expensive, we can't afford to subsidise this, it's more expensive than nuclear. But subsidising in the right way, incentivizing and leveraging private investment grew the industry, deployed offshore wind at a phenomenal rate, which brought down costs, improved the technology, grew the companies and industry, provided jobs, high quality jobs in areas of the UK that very much welcomed them. And now offshore wind is cheaper than gas.
These subsidies already announced, still in their infancy. But I wonder what difference they are making already. And I suppose that comes down sometimes to corporate thinking about where they may set up, where they may establish, whether they have the financial support to invest in new R&D in green tech.
I think already we've seen some announcements from companies that, battery companies, car companies, that they may switch investments to the US because of the subsidy that is on offer. But this isn't a zero-sum game. In the end, most of, a huge part of these clean technology industries didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. They have grown as a result of the need and the investment. The IPCC again making abundantly clear that the need is still there for us, and for us to expand these industries, expand this clean transition, and more of that investment will grow. Continue to grow those industries, continue to grow the opportunities. So it's about investing in the right way at the right time.
Gareth, it's so good to talk to you. Thank you for being with us on the programme.
Thank you.
For all the talk of the environment, it's clear this is also about creating jobs and business. But is it also about governments protecting their own economies? Kamala Dower is an expert on trade law at the University of Sussex. Kamala, it's good to have you on the programme. And let me put this to you. If you take the word green out of these subsidies, it's essentially just state aid, isn't it?
So yes, it's pure and simple, it's state aid. The difference is in the EU, it's very carefully regulated under this framework, whereas in the US, they're not so interested in international rules and norms to regulate their subsidies.
Yeah, so talk to me about the difference. Why is the US taking such a different approach to the EU?
Well, The US is, it's in terms of a power game, the US has always felt that it's been able to actually sort of guide the international trading systems just through its pure hegemony or dominance, whereas the EU is very much a proponent of the international rules-based system under the WTO and internally to ensure the level playing field among the EU member states.
And whenever we hear the word state aid, it suggests that actually just by putting the word green in front of this, the US is able to throw out all of those internationally agreed laws.
Well, there is a real problem with greenwashing at the moment. What the US is doing is actually supporting its domestic industry and domestic production through these local content requirements, which actually violates international trade rules under the WTO. But there are no filters in US government at the moment to actually try and stop these transgressions. But at the end of the day, this is a subsidy race. And China obviously is ahead of the game in this. And the real problem is that a subsidy race is really a trade war. And we know what happens when there are trade wars from what happened just before the Second World War. And we also know that poor countries can't play this game. This is a rich country race. So you're actually exacerbating global inequalities.
Interesting too, you mentioned that this is an industrialised, a developed world issue. Where does all of this leave the developing world, those that aren't able to offer these sorts of subsidies to business?
Well, those that aren't able to offer subsidies are really left out of this game, and they just have to hope that they can afford to import these goods. And they might not be the cheapest, and they might not be the most green of what we would like for the world to be pursuing. For those countries that sort of can, like India and Indonesia, they look at see how the US is flouting international rules, and they think, well, we're just going to have to play the same game. Do you fight fire with fire, or do you have the moral high ground? Well, when you have domestic pressures at home, such as unemployment and poverty, then sometimes it's easier politically to just join the subsidy game. And that's not the most efficient use of resources, and it's not the most effective way to mitigate the climate crisis.
And we're talking here about three big blocs, China, the EU and the US. I wonder, after Brexit, the UK's departure from the EU, where does all of this leave the UK?
Well, the UK has obviously been trying to have a sort of a green industrial policy as well under Brexit. I think the problem is the UK is equally conditioned by the international rules-based system. And so we already have the EU actually bringing the UK into consultations under the WTO because of its low carbon subsidies. So the UK is as much to worry about by these rules as any other country. And again, the UK hasn't got the resources that the US has. So in terms of the industry, maybe it's more about new tech rather than focusing on electric vehicles, EV and solar panels, which are already mature industries. Maybe we have to think even further ahead of the game and look at hydrogen and further on, because it does seem to be a little bit of a waste of time to try and catch up with China.
Camilla, thank you so much. Really good to have your thoughts on the programme this week. Thank you. And what impact does all of this have on business? Well, if you're a car maker, for example, deciding where to make your next generation of electric cars, could subsidies influence your decision? Well, let's talk to someone who's tackling just that. Wayne Griffiths is the boss of SEAT. So Wayne, thank you for being on the programme this week, and talk to me about that investment you're making in electric battery production there. How important were subsidies in making that decision?
The total investment that the Volkswagen Group and we at SEAT, together with our partners in the Future Fast Forward, are making is actually a 10 billion euro investment in electrifying Spain. And that investment is split across different factors. One is developing the small electric cars that we are going to build here in Spain, in our two plants in Martorell and Pamplona. The other is preparing the plants. So the plants themselves need to be prepared for electrification. And then the big news last week, obviously, where we were laying the foundation with the Prime Minister and the King of Spain for the first gigafactory battery plant in Spain, in Valencia.
When you look around the world at where you might set up your operations, expand operations, how influential is that subsidy argument in where you establish?
I think it is playing a key role at the moment. And We have to make sure that Europe, because it's basically a playing field, a battlefield in Europe, that we maintain our competitiveness, particularly against the US. So in our decision for the 10 billion investment in Spain, the Spanish government played a key role. We had a unique moment in time, a unique opportunity with the European Next Generation funds that we could use to support us in making our decision, particularly for the new activity of the battery plant in Valencia. That was absolutely key and essential. And as I say, I think, looking ahead, when we see what's happening in the United States and also in Canada, in the North American region, Europe needs to maintain its competitiveness.
Yes, and that neatly gets us onto that story in the headlines of late. You are part of the VW group. There's a lot of speculation that the group may decide, instead of setting up that big investment in Eastern Europe, that money may go to the US instead to take advantage of some of their new subsidies. How much truth is there in that?
I can't comment on the plans of Volkswagen Group in East Europe, because I'm here in Southern Europe, in Spain. And I can confirm that we're doing our investment here for the battery electric plants and for the battery plants here. I think you also need battery plants close to where you produce your cars. And we produce small electric cars in Spain, so it makes a lot of sense for us to have that battery plant here in Spain. There's another factor, however, that I'd like to bring to the table, not just the subventions, and that's, if you're going to build battery electric vehicles with zero emissions, then you need renewable energy to do that. It doesn't make sense to build batteries, electric batteries, with fossil fuel generated electricity. So I think, particularly in the case of Spain, with 50% of energy sourced from renewable energy, and the potential of that become even more. You can see behind me that I'm in downtown Barcelona. The sun is shining. The sun shines here 300 days a year. So we have a huge potential of renewable energy. And I think that plays an important role and has played a decisive role in the case of Spain.
And so what is the tipping point, though? When are we more likely to be in an electric vehicle than one fueled by fossil fuels?
And that will depend a lot on the country, I think. If we look in the north of Europe, it's already very advanced. The average across all of Europe for electrified vehicles at the moment is 20% of all car sales are electrified vehicles. Germany slightly higher, 25%. Obviously, Scandinavian countries, the Netherlands even higher. The UK also, I think, roughly at that average level, 20-25%. When we look at Southern Europe, however, Southern Europe is lagging behind, particularly as here in Spain, with only 10% electrification. So it is different in different markets. But I think a lot of it will depend as well how committed the European governments are in their individual markets to support the acceleration to electrification. And I mean not only in terms of incentives for electric cars, but also the charging infrastructure, which is one of the biggest worries the consumers have, that needs to speed up as well. And from a Spanish point of view, I'm leading the car industry here in Spain. As president of the car industry here in Spain, we're pushing the government to speed up with concrete actions in these areas.
Can the climate wait that long?
The climate, I mean, the targets for 2035, zero emissions, is an ambitious target. When you see at the moment where we are today and where we want to be within a period of 10 years' time, it's one cycle of a car. And obviously, cars are not the only producer of CO2 and emissions. So we need to do our job, but we want to be part of the solution. We are speeding up. I think from 2025 onwards, with the small battery electric vehicles built in Spain, we will see, from a Volkswagen Group perspective, and certainly at Seat and Cupra, our number of electric cars going up considerably. And we, with Cupra, want to be, by 2030, a fully electric brand. So I think our targets are ambitious. We just have to start speeding up now.
Wayne, it's good to talk to you. Enjoy that sunshine there in Barcelona.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on the programme. See you soon.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Now, we've been talking all about subsidies for green technology. But here in the UK, the government has also just announced extra help for the film industry in the shape of generous tax credits for productions that are based in the country. But do big blockbuster movies really need financial help? Well, let's talk now to Sir William Sargent. He's founded one of the world's most successful post-production companies, Framestore, back in the 1980s. So William, welcome to Talking Business. Now, we've been discussing green subsidies on the programme, and There are now new subsidies for your industry too. But whilst green subsidies might help the planet, is it right we're spending money subsidising your industry? Why do you need financial help?
Well, it's to be competitive, number one. Secondly, it's about a £5 billion inward investment, so it's money that wouldn't come here. We get about £7 of value for every £1 of tax credit. So they're self-financing. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't have the additional benefit. It's very simple. So no tax credits, the business wouldn't come here. Tax credit, the business comes here, but the world is catching up with us.
And those credits make it more financially viable to operate in a certain country, don't they? Talk to me what would happen if they weren't on offer. Can you still afford to do it in somewhere like the UK?
Well, there's the Hollywood studios who basically are, fund 90% of the major content making these days, even when it's done in different parts of the world. Like Dark Materials, which we did with the BBC, is co-funded with an American company, Warner Brothers. So if we didn't have the tax credits, the production would basically go to different parts of the world, and a community that we spent 25 years building, which is, now the creative industries is the fastest growing part of the economy in terms of employment and value. Has been for the last decade or plus, okay? So we would basically be giving up something that we're the world leaders in and other people would like to have. And of course, once you give it up, it's very difficult to get it back.
Yeah, and you've worked on some huge productions, haven't you? I'm thinking just lately, things like Top Gun, Harry Potter, the Marvel movies you talked about. A lot of them, though, are sequels. There's that common criticism right now that originality, creativity has gone out the window because you can just churn out sequels. Is there any truth in that?
Not really. The world has always had sequels. Look, what's wrong with Harry Potter? Various variations on a story. We were happily buying the books and watching the movies. Sequels, basically, if you run out of energy, is one thing, but actually they aren't. Think about the Marvel cinematic universe. Every time we get new variations of characters and stories. We all want characters and stories. Look, Coronation Street is a X number of times a week. EastEnders X number of times a week sequel, isn't it? But we like the characters we love, and we like the environments and the storylines we love.
I'd love to see some of your special effects in Coronation Street or EastEnders. And there's also, I guess, a merging of television, movies, and gaming now. A huge part of what you do is gaming. Talk to me about the direction of the industry overall, because the lines really are blurring between what was a traditional industry and a very new industry. I'm thinking of stuff like The Last of Us, a computer game, hugely successful on television with really filmic production values.
Precisely. Well, if you think about it, all this is storytelling. So it all comes down to storytelling. And the direction of travel in games this past decade has been to tell stories. So previously, quite often, the plot lines and the characterizations. Now you have characters in games which you actually connect to emotionally in that.
And what is most exciting for you in all of the different things that your company does right now?
We are working with technology companies, and we're working with different forms of reality, which we call mixed reality and immersive technology. So, if you look at a game like Fortnite, for example, which is an immersive world, we currently consume our entertainment and live our lives in a physical sense and in a digital sense with our mobile phones or laptops or whatever.
You talk about the virtual world, like Meta, for example. We know betting really big on its metaverse. It hasn't quite taken off yet as they thought it would. Is it shaping out how you thought it would?
It's shaping out in that all the components of what is called, and I'm always very looking to use the word metaverse, as indeed are many of the genuine players in it. It's a three-dimensional world that we're talking about. And you look back at the internet, and not the obvious, Meta came out of nowhere, as did Google in the internet, right? So you're looking at the same analogies as we move into the three-dimensional metaverse type world, in that it's like Hollywood. Nobody knows anything. Nobody is guaranteed to be a winner just because you spent $10 billion saying you want to own the metaverse. It's too early to own the metaverse.
You've been doing this quite a while. Has the industry changed in the way you thought it would? Did you ever foresee that you'd be creating this sort of stuff when you founded the business?
We aspired to, basically set up in Soho, 4 guys and girls in a room in Soho, right? And we wanted to be big in Soho, and then we wanted to be big in London. But we always set out We wanted to be big in the world from the day we were 4 people, because film was obviously where the action was, and that was Hollywood. And Hollywood didn't know London existed 37 years ago. So our aspirations were global and ambitious in storytelling, because it's about storytelling and enabling the story. And so we look out now what will be happening in the next 5 years, and we can see it. It's all there in front of us. It's a question of, will someone pay for it now? Will someone take the financial risk? Because it all comes back to consumers obviously buying something that then makes it financially feasible to do something different in storytelling.
It sounds really exciting. Sir William, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for joining us there from LA. Thank you.
You're very kind. Thank you very much.
So that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest on the global economy. That's on the BBC website or on the smartphone app. You can reach me if you want to. I'm on Twitter at BBC Ben Thompson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.